Jeremy Corbyn's independent campaign to retain his seat in Islington North is one of the most hotly watched contests in this entire general election. And for the first time, we have some polling to show what might happen in the vote next week. Now, this is a constituency poll by Survation shared exclusively with Novara Media. And as you can see, it's close. Somewhat worrying. Labour on 43%, Corbyn on 29%, and the Lib Dems on 7%, the Greens on 7%, Reform on 6%, and the Conservatives on 6%. So obviously a two-horse race, as probably everyone already knew. But at the moment, Labour 14 points ahead. There was some sort of cause for hope in the polls for those supporting Jeremy Corbyn. So it showed, obviously, him trailing in voting attention. It also shows he has a higher favourability than both the Labour Party and the current leader, Keir Starmer, in the seat. So in a hypothetical two-candidate contest between the Labour Party and Corbyn, Corbyn would win 55% of votes to Labour's 45%, excluding undecided voters. In the constituency, Corbyn has a net favourability rating of plus 21. Starmer has only plus 0.3. Grace, clearly the people of Islington North seem to like Jeremy Corbyn, but if the polls remain as they currently are, or if this poll is an accurate sort of portrayal of opinion in Islington North, Labour are set to win this seat.
Yeah, it's really disappointing for all of us who've been campaigning for Jeremy. And it just shows, the number one thing, we still have time. It's so important for any activists anywhere, if they can, to go out and get knocking on doors and help the campaign. Because, that is really the only asset that Jeremy has in the constituency. It's the ability to marshal this huge amount of volunteers who are really passionate about his campaign, who are passionate about him, and the example that he'll be able to set in Parliament, and indeed the message that it would send to Labour if he did win. There's obviously a huge amount that campaign is up against as well, not least in the form of the absence of any data. Now, a lot of people watching this will have been canvassing before. You know that when you canvass for the Labour Party, you have data on, the likely inhabitants of somewhere, a house, flat, whatever, before you knock on the door, and their previous voting habits. So, you can target the places that have voted Labour before, and just, it's often the kind of get the vote out operation. It's kind of, do you still support Labour? If so, please get out and make sure you're voting for all of these reasons. Without that data, it becomes much, much harder. It's a kind of blind exercise. We're going to be knocking on a lot of doors that, are not going to vote for you, potentially not even going to vote, not registered to vote. So it just becomes a lot more challenging. And they just need a lot more kind of feet on the ground, basically. So firstly, if you can, get down to the campaign and help him out. But if this poll does prove to be true, and Jeremy doesn't win that seat, it will be immensely disappointing. There will be a lot of jubilation on the Labour right. That's undoubtedly true. And it just does kind of go to show the issue that, you have in this kind of two-party majoritarian system, which is that most people do just vote for the colour, rather than kind of looking into the candidate. And this particular candidate is someone that, as we've seen, has kind of been supportive of the privatisation of healthcare. And, there's been lots of kind of discussion about his, previous comments that I think a lot of people in Islington North wouldn't approve of. But that's not something that really gets out there to the kinds of voters that are going to swing a contest like this. It's easy for us to look on Twitter and be like, oh yeah, obviously this guy's bad. Obviously, Corbyn is great and is going to do well. But there are so many people, obviously, who vote in elections who are, very weakly politicized, if at all, and are just, basically looking at the news every now and again thinking, oh yeah, Labour's probably going to win. They look like they've got a couple of good policies. I want to get the Tories out. I'm going to vote Labour, rather than thinking about the kind of intricacies of each race. So that is concerning. And yeah, again, get down to Islington if you possibly can.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an election that's going to be particularly difficult for independents. Obviously, I hope Jeremy Corbyn wins. I'd love Faiz Shaheen to win in Chingford. I would recommend people to go canvass for either or both of them. But there's so much momentum now behind get the Tories out, which I think means lots of people are just sort of thinking, I want to do whatever I think is the safest way to get the Tories out, which most people think is voting Labour. Now, obviously, if you're in Islington North, your vote is not going to affect whether or not the Tories get out, because it's either going to be Jeremy Corbyn or Labour. So people should be able to vote with their hearts. But, it's quite understandably, not everyone follows politics particularly closely. So understandable that someone would go into the polling booth and think, I like Jeremy Corbyn, but we can't take any risks. I've got to vote Labour because I want the Tories out. And I suppose that one of the purposes of canvassing is to sort of say, look, in this seat, that's just really not the case. Labour are going to win a massive majority. And anyway, there's no way in hell that the Conservatives are going to win this seat. So you should be able to vote with your heart. A similar issue, actually, in some of those seats where the Greens are competing